there's a curious relationship between the moon and Saturn. And it has to do with what you might call higher dimensional physics and electromagnetic fields. But the moon is to the Earth what Saturn is to the sun. And what's interesting about this is that they're both kind of binding mechanisms, which bind the electromagnetic field to a certain frequency, which and does not allow it to have much of an expansion or much of a condensation. And so it's a fixing kind of thing. So the moon fixes the electromagnetic field of the Earth and keeps it coherent. And Saturn fixes the electromagnetic field of the sun and gives it a coherency. And this is all very esoteric information, which is going probably most people will think is wacky. You have to kind of understand higher dimensional physics and time and all of that. So what it does is that Saturn is Chronos in ancient mythology, or which is time. And also he is Set, the great god Set from Egypt, and Satan. And he is the god who devours his children in order to become young again. And so Saturn is a fixing kind of thing, and it sets us into linear time, and it drops us into an unnatural time. It's not natural. A natural time is a polychronic way of looking at the world, in which 1 second can be long or short or a minute. But what we've done is we've set up a contrivance of a monochronic culture, which says that 1 second follows another second, 1 minute follows another minute. Each minute is exactly the same length. Each hour is exactly the same length. But if we examine time in our own lives, we understand that actually that's not true. That 1 minute sitting on a very hot stove, it can seem like an hour. An hour talking to a beautiful woman can seem like 2 seconds. So time is relative, but because of civilization and the setting of time, through civilization, we have begun to believe that the contrivance of time, sequential time, which is really just being used so that we show up at the same time at work and go to the airplane at the same time and talk on Skype at the same time, we now believe that this is what time is. And in that, we are trapped. And we're trapped in a monochronic culture, and since we've allowed ourselves to be trapped in a monochronic culture where time has a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is just BS, it's not true, but we've allowed ourselves to believe it, we now have inordinate fear of death, because that's the end, we think, and we have created an apocalypse that's down the line from right now, somewhere in the future. We are going to kill ourselves because the false belief in monochronic culture, our monochronic culture has given us the false belief that we have a beginning and a middle and an end, and in that we have become enslaved. We're enslaved by a false belief system engendered by forces that do not have our interests, our best interests at hand. And they have enslaved us. And the first step to breaking free of this enslavement is to break free of monochronic time and go back to polychronic time. Where I grew up in the center of the United States when I was young, we lived next to Indian culture, Native American culture. And one time we were all waiting for the train to come, and it was late. And there was about 50 people in the train station, and maybe 10 of them were Native Americans, and the other 40 were European stock. And I was a young kid, and I remember all the white people agitated because the train was 15 minutes late. And I looked over at the Native Americans, and they were all just, whatever. whatever time the train comes, that's when it comes. And then the train came, and then all the Europeans are crowding into the train and like mad, like the train's going to go as soon as they're in, which it's not. It's going to go whenever they're ready to go. And then after all then the Indians very slowly got up and got on the train, never got upset, never wasted any energy on the whole thing. And that's how we used to be, and that's what we've lost. And in that losing, we've lost a lot. We've lost our appreciation of nature, of what we really are. Our deep psychic senses have atrophied. We have become slaves of possibly off-planet forces which seek something from us, something mysterious. And I think it has to do with Saturn portrayed as the Grim Reaper. And that's one of his portrayals with the scythe, which is shaped like a 7, and he's reaping the souls. And I think that the ancient Gnostics, who were the second biggest religion on earth, they said that we were being ruled by a group of alien beings called archons, and they had a relationship with Saturn. And they said that they were harvesting our souls. I know this all sounds kind of crazy, but if you read the Nag Hammadi and the Pistis Sophia text, you'll see that the ancients firmly believed that an off-planet force was enslaving the human race. Now sounds like I've gone way askew of Stanley Kubrick, but actually I haven't, because if you go back to 2001 and you understand Gnosticism, you can see that 2001 is the single greatest Gnostic work of art of the last 1,000 years. And it is somewhat based on Arthur C. Clarke's book, Childhood's End, which is arguably the greatest science fiction novel ever written, and that is also a Gnostic masterpiece. So we begin to see that inside of Kubrick's head was a deep-seated interest in the dualism of Gnosticism, and this idea that there's a demiurge or an evil off-planet war entity that is enslaving the human race. And I have come to believe that this is true, even though I started out as a skeptic and didn't even believe in anything off-planet. Now I've come full circle, and I've come to believe that the Earth is actually being invaded by off-planet entities, almost a parasitical entity, not a living thing that looks like us. It's more like Colin Wilson's idea of a mind parasite, and it's infecting us, and it's contagious. So he embedded a lot of the things that he wanted to convey in all of those films: Eyes Wide Shut, Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, especially The Shining, a little bit less in Full Metal Jacket, but then back in true form again in Eyes Wide Shut. And I believe the coup de grace was going to be AI, which unfortunately was turned into a sentimental maudlin piece of crap by Steven Spielberg, who apparently cannot think beyond a 12-year-old. I don't know what's wrong with that guy. And he ruined Kubrick's work, by the way, completely, because I know one of the technicians that was working on AI before Spielberg got to it, and the real plot of AI is a shocker, and that'll be out in my next Kubrick film, Kubrick's Odyssey 2, Kubrick the Magician. The Shining is now beginning to think is a masterpiece of an unusual kind. Because now The Shining is becoming apparent to me is not three-dimensional chess, but maybe seven-dimensional chess. Because what he did in The Shining is so brilliant. He not only faked the making of a Stephen King novel so he could tell us the secrets of what he went through during the Apollo footage making, and how his wife found out about it, and how every deviation in the movie The Shining from Stephen King's book The Shining is actually the story of sidetrack story of him going into what happened to him during the Apollo faking. he revealed how they kept the astronauts quiet, by the way, the astronauts that were not involved in Apollo. They Clockwork Oranged them. That's the term that they used in NASA for it. They Clockwork Oranged me. And that meant that every time you began talking or thinking about something you weren't supposed to talk or think about, you got sick. So that's why Neil Armstrong doesn't do any interviews, because he doesn't want to puke. And then finally, in Eyes Wide Shut, he concretizes this whole idea of unseen forces by showing us the people that run the world. The Zieglers, played by Sidney Pollack. Ziegler is Yiddish for bricklayer, which means Freemason. So we see this idea in Stanley that unseen forces are ruling us, and they're penetrating into us, and they're getting us to be what we don't want it to be, and we're not allowed in to this thing at all. And even he is not allowed into it, not even Stanley. He's just a worker, a highly paid worker, but in the end he was just a house doctor like Tom Cruise is in Eyes Wide Shut. He's just the caretaker like Jack Nicholson is in The Shining. And I really don't know if they're going to let me live long enough to get it out. We'll see.